Hey, good morning, everybody. Welcome to this Facebook. I'm Karen Farnsworth at my quilt shop today in Greentop, Missouri. It is a beautiful snowy day in Missouri today. We had like 6 inches of snow at my house, so it was kind of fun commuting over here to get to the shop today to do this Facebook Live. But luckily, had I been stuck at home, I actually chose a topic for this Facebook Live that house from the snowy front yard from my. I'm glad that I made it to the shop because I do have some pretty quilts as backdrops and to show you, to demonstrate today. So what I wanted to talk to you about is deciding between custom quilting and overall quilting. So when we get those customer quilts in, or when we are quilting our own quilt tops, when we've decided that we're going to machine quilt that top, the next decision is, am I going to put an overall design on it, or am I going to put custom quilting? So custom quilting, of course, being stitch in the ditch to do that, putting particular blocks in certain areas of the quilt. So instead of just stitching a pattern across the entire quilt, being really careful and specifically placing those patterns where you want them on the quilt. So sometimes this can be a difficult decision. I find it usually fairly easy because a lot of you already know this, but I call myself the queen of edge to edge because I feel like 98% of the quilts out there look pretty good with an edge to edge on it. But we're going to talk about sometimes when maybe custom quilting is warranted. So I just have a couple of quilts to show you, and we're going to talk about not what to put on a particular quilt because that's an individual decision. You know, I'm not going to tell you what patterns to quilt. But when we're deciding whether we're going to go with edge to edge, overall quilting, or custom quilting, there are some questions that we can ask ourselves to help us make that decision. So the number one question I always ask is, what does the customer want? If it's a customer's quilt, we need to do what that customer wants. And the biggest part of their decision-making process is usually budget, okay? So what is the customer's budget? Can they afford the custom? Do they want to pay for the custom for that quilt? If quilts, and maybe money's not an issue, but we have a time budget. We're going to put more time quilting that custom quilt than we would for the average edge-to-edge or overall quilt. So what is the customer's money budget, or what is our time budget? How much are we willing to invest in that quilt? The second thing that we can ask ourselves, the question we should ask is, what is our skill set? As the quilters, we know what we can do. We know what we're good at. Am I best at pantographs? Am I best at letting that Statler stitch an edge to edge across a quilt? Or am I best at putting cool designs all over the quilt and making it look, whether it's hand-driven or computer-driven? So what's your skill set? And follow-up to that question, what skill set do I want to develop? So maybe our strength isn't feathers and custom quilting, but we want it to be. And if we want to be good at feathers and custom quilting, we need to practice. So that's a good reason to choose to do a quilt custom, so that we can practice that. How about another question? Another thing that we can ask about the quilt is, how is it going to be used? Often. Is it destined to go to a quilt show? Is it going to be placed on a wall? Is it for a bed? What is the end goal? What's the end, the place where this quilt is going? So those questions can help us decide whether to invest in the custom quilting customer, or whether to put an edge to edge on the quilt. So here's another good question. Will the quilting show on the quilt? This is why I think a lot of times overall quilting looks really good on most quilts. So if we have busy fabrics like this quilt, lots of busy fabrics and busy piecing, the quilting is not going to show. So that's one question I always ask is, so if I take the time, this quilt top, will it show? Will anybody? Can you tell from that I quilted half of the quilt with edge to edge and half of the quilt custom. Here's the back. And that half that I did custom took about 5 times as long as the edge to edge half. So that's a really good example. Now, yeah, it does show up on the back, but it's the front of the quilt, hopefully, that we're focusing on. So if the quilting is not going to show, maybe a texture is all we need. So an edge to edge or overall quilting. Next question, will one thread color look good on every fabric of the quilt? Take this quilt for an example. So because I use 2 vastly different colors of fabric, if I use white, it's going to show. If I use the dark blue, it'll show up in the neck. So an edge-to-edge or overall quilting maybe isn't the best choice. Here's another example. When we look at this quilt, is one thread color going to look good on the entire quilt? Probably not. Custom quilting might be the best idea for that quilt. And as we're talking about thread color and looking at this quilt, this one, and then I made a smaller version of that quilt and quilted it as an edge to edge just to show the difference. And it doesn't look too bad. I like this quilt, but I like this one better. I like the feathered wreaths and the background fills in there. But you can see that one quilt could be quilted in multiple different ways and still get a good result. One more similar one. Another question to ask ourselves is the size of the quilt, okay? How long is it going to take? If it's smaller, custom quilting might be faster. If it's smaller, we might want denser patterns. We might want to custom quilt that. So here's my little baby. And I custom quilted it with smaller versions of these patterns. All right, one more question we might ask ourselves is, what is the most important element of the quilt? Is it particular fabrics? Is it a particular applique? In the case of this quilt, the most important thing about this quilt to me was the individual blocks. It was a block exchange that my mother and mother-in-law and I did. And so the blocks are the highlight. I didn't want to put an edge to edge across the entire quilt unless it was a basic texture, because I didn't want to detract from the blocks, from those special blocks and all those different bright colors. So I chose to stitch in the ditch and basically custom quilt this just with ditch work. My choice. I think an edge to edge would have looked pretty good across it if I had chosen a texture that just kind of fell to the background. Alright, the last question I wanted to present to you today when we are considering whether to go with overall quilting or custom quilting is, does the quilt have problems? Does it have issues? Where are its trouble areas? I sometimes get quilts that have a lot of fullness in the borders, and sometimes the easiest way to deal with the fullness in borders is to put a border design in the borders of that quilt. So sometimes I might do a modified custom, so edge to edge in the middle, but a border around the outside, so that I can focus on those borders and tackle those trouble areas, right, specifically just those spaces. That's not to say that an edge to edge can't work, and you can get that edge to edge or that overall quilting across that entire quilt as well. But those are some questions that I consider when I'm looking at a customer's quilt or my own quilt, when I'm trying to decide whether I'm going to put an overall quilting design on it or that custom quilting. So we need to consider our investment of time and money. We need to consider our skill set and where we're trying to develop our skill set, what the quilt is going to be used for, whether thread colors are going to look good on it, what's most important about that quilt, so what we want to highlight about that quilt or accent about that quilt, and whether there are trouble areas that we need to focus on and deal with on that quilt. There are a lot of other questions, of course, that we can ask when we're determining whether we're going to edge to edge, overall quilt, or custom quilt, but those are a few. I hope that this little live, I know it was a quick one, but I hope this little live gave you a few things to think about when you're considering that next quilt top and what you're going to do with it. I appreciate you being here. I hope everybody has a fantastic weekend, and on behalf of myself and of course Gamel, please stay safe and stay healthy, and it's amazing what you all are doing, helping with masks and quilting, because quilts give so much comfort and love to people. We wish you the best in your businesses and hobbies, and don't forget to catch us for the next live. There'll be another one, 3 Central this afternoon, and then every day 10:30 and 3 o'clock. So catch us, and don't forget about the virtual quilt show as well. I know there's some amazing classes that are being prepared for that, which is in just over a week. I haven't checked that out, virtualquiltshow.com. And I'm gonna sign off. Thanks for being with me, and I'll see you guys on Facebook. Bye.